In the summer of 2019, I had a solo trip to Japan, and a big reason for going was to experience the arcades of Tokyo and later Osaka. I've wanted to see Japan since I was a child, and I got to play on many Sega Taiken arcade cabinets. The brainchildren of Yu Suzuki, large-scale arcade cabinets that combine movement, feedback, and high-speed scaling 2D graphics to create immersive 3D experiences. I also love finding home ports of arcade games, and when digging through the many amazing retro game shops, I stumbled across another destination of superscalar ports that I hadn't realised before, NEC's PC Engine. The PC Engine was a popular console in its home region of Japan from its release in '87 right through to its end in '94. The base console can be expanded upon to play the first CD-ROM games available for home console, and added RAM to further increase the system power. These superscalar ports all came on the standard Hue cards, a proprietary ROM format, and although being an 8-bit console, graphics and sound-wise, the PC Engine sits somewhere between the 3rd and 4th gen of consoles, and it held its own against the Sega Mega Drive and Super Nintendo throughout most of its life. The PC Engine was more successful than the Mega Drive in Japan, and so Sega supported the console with quite a few ports of its most famous games, including 5 superscalers. Like the Mega Drive, it lacked dedicated scaling hardware, and so I feel it's only right to add a bonus episode to my superscaler series to see how well the PC Engine ports stack up against their counterparts on Sega's own consoles. There was no port of Hang On for the PC Engine, so Sega's first superscalar port was of Space Harrier in December '88, a little over a year after the console released in Japan. Space Harrier's cabinet featured an analog flight stick and cockpit style seat that tilted and rolled with your movements while playing. It ran on an upgraded Hang On board, and it was very advanced, innovative and successful in its time, and 1 year after its release in late '85, Sega brought it to the Master System. 2 years later it released on PC Engine, and being on more powerful hardware really does the game some justice when compared to the Master System port. The use of colour is more varied and less contrasty. The sprites are more detailed and accurate, with less flickering and more of them overall. The game speed feels both faster and smoother, and your control of the Harrier feels more accurate for it. The scrolling background is back in place as well, with a decent replication of the sky gradient, just with the parallax effect removed. The iconic checkerboard pattern has been replaced with what must be a simpler to display striped pattern, and the soundtrack feels a bit muted in that strange PC Engine way that the console sometimes sounds. The Mega Drive got Space Harrier 2, a decent console-only sequel, but overall Space Harrier on PC Engine feels so much more successful as a cut-down arcade version than Sega managed on either of its home consoles at the time. It feels fast and faithful to the original, much closer than what you might expect for an 8-bit machine, and I think it's the best home console version available until the 32X version in '94. It would be a year and a half before the next superscaler came to the PC Engine, and that was with Power Drift. This ran on the Y board, Sega's 4th iteration of the superscalar arcade board, and with this big increase in power came the use of bitmap sprites for the road. This creates roller coaster style tracks where the camera rolls with your turns, and the cabinet would roll up to 20 degrees to simulate this. It's a very ambitious game that's incredible to see and play live. Perhaps this ambition is why Sega would not release a home port on their consoles until a Saturn Sega Ages release exclusively in Japan in 1998. Mega CD and 32X ports were supposed to be in development, but they never appeared, and the game received versions on lots of home computers like many of the superscalers, particularly in Europe. It was also very ambitious to attempt to port Power Drift to the PC Engine, and as you might expect, a lot has had to be cut back. First of all, the tilting camera is gone, and so is the panning camera before races. This is faked scaling after all, where sprites of different sizes are replaced as they're supposed to get closer to the camera. The number of opponents is greatly decreased, and so is the number of tracks. On the positives, this is in many ways a technical marvel for the PC Engine. There is an admirable attempt at recreating the undulating verticality of the tracks, and when on the ground there is a decent amount of trackside detail, this game is still throwing around a large number of big and colourful sprites. The music is also a decent recreation of the arcade tracks, and even the controls feel pretty faithful to the loose, sliding style of the arcade. The frame rate isn't high enough though to make this hugely enjoyable, and the end result falls into just being way too choppy. And that's a shame because I feel like this is really pushing the PC Engine to its limits, but really it's just been pushed too far. I have a soft spot for Power Drift in the arcade though, so I probably enjoy this port more than it's actually a good game. A few months later in 1990, the PC Engine got Afterburner 2. The arcade game ran on the X board in 1987, Sega's third superscaler, and this added power was needed so that Yu Suzuki and his team could rotate sprites and the playing field fully for the first time. This effect was used exceptionally well to create the rolling sensation of piloting a fighter jet, and the Tycoon cabinet replicated this movement with 4-axis tilting and rotation. Along with its incredibly high game speed, insane number of sprites on screen and truly iconic soundtrack, Afterburner is one of the all-time classic arcade games. Sega released an awful port on Master System the year of the arcade release. It's terribly choppy, lacking in every area, and it's hardly surprising given the gulf between the system power. The Mega Drive got its own port the same year as the PC Engine release, and this is much more playable, doing a great job of faking the scaling to produce very fast and smooth gameplay. But I think the PC Engine port is excellent though. It completely blows the Master System version away, so the comparison goes straight to the Mega Drive, and immediately the PC Engine port just looks like it's trying harder. The camera pulls into the aircraft carrier just like in the arcade. The music kicks off with much more gusto, and the horizon gradient is back in place, giving the separation between sea, land and air that is sorely missing from the Mega Drive version. And that version's annoying auto machine gun is pleasingly absent. It's not a complete walkover though. The Mega Drive's rolling horizon effect is considerably smoother. The sound effects are clearer and a bit punchier, and the speed control setup is far better. Adjusting your speed on the PC Engine is a real pain, having to use a combination of buttons. Both the Mega Drive and PC Engine ports of Afterburner are good to play, but I really think the PC Engine one is the superior port that pushes the console and overall feels much closer to the arcade original. Like with Space Harrier, this would be the best console version until the 32X received a port in '94. Also from the Sega X board, arriving just before Christmas 1990, was Thunderblade for PC Engine, the only game on today's list not designed by Yu Suzuki. Thunderblade released in arcades in '87, featuring a Tycoon cabinet rather underwhelming when compared to the headline Yu Suzuki titles. The game is technically very impressive though, featuring overhead and into the screen movement that shows off great scaling effects throughout. It also has a short but classic soundtrack, actually one of my Sega favourites. Thunderblade got a Master System port and a Mega Drive one called Super Thunderblade, but it's based off the same game. The Master System port is really rough. Like with the Afterburner, there's just no way a convincing version of an export game can be made on this console. The overhead sections feature a single scrolling background layer, sluggish controls and suicidal enemies. The gameplay then cuts to the into the screen sections that feature what must be the longest residential blocks ever seen. It's just awful to play, and I really did not enjoy capturing the video for this game. Super Thunderblade on the Mega Drive has a special place in my heart however, because it was one of the first games I ever owned. It was a Japanese launch title in '88, so looks very primitive by Mega Drive standards. The overhead viewpoint within the levels has been cut, only coming at the level's end, so the into the screen sections take up the majority of the game, and it attempts to throw a lot of enemies and detail around, but it's very jerky in doing this. The problem with faking this kind of superscaler effect is very visible here, because as the sprites are getting replaced by slightly larger versions to make them appear closer to the camera, it gets more difficult to understand exactly how far away things are supposed to be. Thunderblade on the PC Engine fares about as well as Super Thunderblade, with the added bonus of recreating the overhead sections. The scaling effect is just about as rough as the Mega Drive, although the levels, sprites and colour scheme looks more accurate to the arcade overall. The overhead sections attempt a decent scrolling effect on the buildings to suggest the perspective shift, but it doesn't update fast enough to look good. Overall, this is better than Sega's own ports on the Master System and Mega Drive, but I think Thunderblade is too ambitious a game to port convincingly to these consoles. Thunderblade would not receive a console version that would do it justice until the 3DS port in 2015. Finally, just a couple of weeks after Thunderblade, right at the end of 1990, the PC Engine received its final superscalar port in Outrun. Released in the arcades in late '86, Outrun required the creation of the second superscalar board. It was a big step forward from Hang-On. The Tycoon cabinet is both awesome and truly iconic, with the speakers in the headset surrounding the player with its classic soundtrack. Outrun stands as one of Sega's most recognisable games to the masses, and naturally it received many home ports. If you've seen my previous videos in this series, you'll know how I actually prefer the Master System port to the Mega Drive one. These ports go down two different routes, with the Master System going in straight as a simplified and cut down version of Outrun, while the Mega Drive tries to be a more direct and faithful port. Neither of these two are very convincing though, and the Mega Drive in particular just looks so rough to me as it tries to replicate the arcade's super fast scrolling effect, and the whole colour scheme is just so high contrast that it totally kills the muted blue sky feel of the arcade. The Master System version has a nicer colour scheme, and the lack of roadside detail actually helps it look less choppy, but it feels like a very slim version of Outrun for this. The PC Engine kind of sits in between the Master System and the Mega Drive. The graphics and overall production value feel quite close to the Mega Drive, but the game looks based on the simpler and cut down style of the Master System. The music sounds good, but not quite as good as on Mega Drive, and the engine sound is awful, so turn it off in the option menu if you're going to play this game. Overall, there isn't much to say about Outrun on PC Engine apart from it's slightly underwhelming. Although fantastic, Outrun itself is quite a simple game, so when you cut it down and take out the dual roads, a few pieces of the trackside detail, and make the roads emptier in general, it just feels a little bit too slim. It's a decent enough version of Outrun that overall I probably enjoy a bit more than Sega's own versions on their consoles, but it still feels a bit flat. Outrun would not receive a great console port until its Sega Ages release on the Saturn in '96. So how good are the PC Engine set of superscalars overall, and how do they stack up to the ports on Sega's own consoles? I think the answer is pretty good across the board. Given the PC Engine is a turbocharged 8-bit machine, it blows the Master System away. Space Harrier, Afterburner, Thunderblade and Outrun are all better on PC Engine than on Master System. Considering how much more power is available for the Mega Drive, you would think that ports of Sega's own games would be better than on PC Engine, but this isn't the case. It's so much better to get a faithful port of Space Harrier. Afterburner looks much closer to the arcade. Thunderblade just shows more ambition than Super Thunderblade, and even though Outrun picks up from the cut-down version, it still feels like a smoother playing experience. The PC Engine quickly rose amongst my favourite retro consoles since I first got one last year, and these impressive superscalar ports have gone a long way to cementing my high opinion of the console. Thank you for watching this video, and please let me know what you think of these PC Engine superscalar ports. I think it's a fantastic console, and I'll have a look at some of its other games soon, so until the next time, happy gaming.